Here we go. One step at a time, don't be living on the line.
Recently, the Trump administration announced that it was considering paying for the wall along the Mexican border by placing a 20% tax on imports from Mexico and other countries with which the United States has a trade deficit. Listen to Press Secretary Sean Spicer explain.
But by doing it that way, we can do $10 billion a year and easily pay for the wall just through that mechanism alone. If you think about what a border tax on imports from countries like Mexico that we have a huge trade deficit does, that's really going to provide the funding.
So let's have a look at some of my key arguments in this lesson. First, I'm going to prove that a border tax is regressive, which means that it places a larger burden on the poor and the middle class than it does on the rich. Next, I'm going to show that an import tax will increase the level of inequality by reducing after-tax incomes for the poor more than for the rich. Let's look at a few facts related to this issue. I'm going to put the links to these sources in my description of the video, so feel free to explore them on your own. The first fact that we need to observe is that the United States has a trade deficit with 15 of its 20 largest trading partners. This relationship can be clearly seen by looking at the following map. This map is a few years old at this point, but the trade balances between the US and most of the world haven't dramatically changed since 2012 when this map was created. Notice that all the countries from the light orange to the dark orange to the brown countries are countries with which the United States has a trade deficit. These include nearly all the countries of Southeast Asia and East Asia, South Asia including India, Russia, many countries in West Africa and North Africa, almost the entire European Union, Canada, Mexico, and a handful of the countries in South America. Only the blue countries are those with which America has a trade surplus. So what's the definition of a trade deficit? This means that from all the orange and brown countries on this map, the United States annually buys more of their goods and services than they buy of our goods and services. Is this a bad thing? Not necessarily. It means that these countries are producing goods that America simply cannot produce because we don't have the right resources, or it's producing goods that we would be able to produce but at a much higher cost, that we benefit from importing those goods due to the lower cost of production and therefore the lower prices achieved in other countries. Another important fact is that 97% of the import spending of the United States of America is on imports from countries with which the United States has a trade deficit. In other words, these 15 countries with which we have trade deficits are our most important trading partners. And imposing tariffs on countries like Mexico and others with which the U.S. has a trade deficit means that the U.S. will be placing tariffs on nearly all the goods that we buy from the rest of the world. So just how important are imports to the American economy? In 2015, according to the CIA World Factbook, 17.5% of a typical American's consumption was on imported goods and services. That's $1 out of $6 approximately that Americans spend is spent on an imported good or service. That's just how dependent American consumers are on these very important imports. Just for comparison, in the same year, about $1 out of $8 earned by an American household was earned from the sale of exports to the rest of the world. So just as important as imports are to the U.S. economy and the U.S. consumer, exports are almost equally as important to the American worker who depends on jobs producing goods for other people in other countries to consume. All right, drawing from these facts and this introduction that I've now provided, we're going to make a few assumptions before we proceed with this lesson. First, we're going to take Sean Spicer's words for what they are when he says that the administration's proposed tax would apply to Mexico and other countries with which we have a trade deficit. Therefore, we assume that this tax will apply to nearly all of the imported goods that Americans buy, about 97% of the imports that Americans buy. Next, if you watch my previous lesson on who will pay for Trump's border wall, we learned that a 20% tax on imports will cause domestic inflation as demand for American output rises and the cost of producing goods in the United States rises. So this would drive up the price level and the average cost of living in the United States. More demand for domestic workers will drive up nominal wages, which will further drive up prices in the United States. So one thing that's important to point out is that even though wages might rise in the United States in terms of the dollar amount that working people earn, because there's more demand for their labor in factories, the prices of everything we buy also increases. This means that American real incomes are not positively affected and might in fact be negatively affected if the rate of inflation resulting from taxing imports, that's 1/6 of what we buy in America, and rising wages cancels out the increase in the dollar amount that workers are earning. Now, another important point here is that U.S. import taxes are almost certainly going to be met with foreign taxes on U.S. goods, possibly decreasing employment in America's export sector. These are called retaliatory tariffs. It's a very common practice that when one country taxes its trading partner's goods, the trading partner retaliates by placing taxes of its own on the other country's goods. So it shouldn't be a surprise if many of these 15 countries that Sean Spicer and Donald Trump have promised to place new taxes on retaliate by taxing American goods coming into their countries. We have to consider the effect this is going to have on employment in the all-important export sector, which provides about 1/8 of Americans' income every year. All right, so let's look down at the analysis I've done for this lesson. Now I'm going to put a link to the spreadsheet containing all this data. Within that spreadsheet, you'll see further links to the sources of the information I've used to create this analysis. So to look at the effect of a 20% import tax on different households in the United States, I've considered 4 different hypothetical households. A household earning $20,000 a year, one earning $52,000 a year, which is actually America's median income, an individual earning $110,000 a year, which is the lowest level of the top quintile. So if you're in the top fifth of American incomes and you're at the very lowest level of that fifth, then you're earning $110,000. And then the lowest level of the top 1%. So if you're earning $520,000 a year, that's individual D, you are right at the bottom of the top 1% of American income earners. Notice the legend here. We've got 4 colors on these graphs. The blue color represent the percentage of total income that individuals of different income levels spend on American goods and services. That ranges from 78% for lower income households to 28% for richer income households. Now you say, well, how do I know that richer households spend less on domestic goods and services than poorer households? Well, that's because richer households tend to save more. You'll notice that a household earning only $20,000 has no savings or almost no savings. It comes out to about $27 a year on average. Poor households simply save less. Savings is a luxury afforded only by the rich in America. As incomes rise, savings rates increase to 9.5% for a median income earner, to 17.6% for somebody in the top fifth, to 35.7% of before tax income for somebody in the top 1%. Notice also that the level of import spending decreases as a percentage of total income the higher incomes become. Again, this is because richer households save more, so they're overall consuming a smaller proportion of their income, and therefore the amount they spend on imports relative to their income also decreases. The green slice of this pie represents the federal income tax. People at the lowest income levels pay almost no federal income tax. That's not a surprise because the primary source of federal tax revenue is income taxes. If you have a low income, you're paying a very small percentage. People at higher income levels pay more federal income tax. There's also a link to the source of this data in the spreadsheet that I used to create these charts. So what is the final purple slice of these pies? That's the area that we really need to look at in order to understand the effect of a 20% import tariff. Now I'm going to scroll down to another chart here, and what we're going to see is a very simple analysis of how, as incomes rise in America, the percentage of total income going towards a 20% import tax decreases. The blue bars in this bar chart represent the incomes of different individuals in America. $20,000 earned by the person on the far left, up to $520,000 earned by somebody in the top 1% on the far right. The red bars represent the percentage of their total income that will be lost due to a 20% import tax. Knowing that the typical American spends 17.5% of their income on imports, the smaller proportion of total income spent on imports, the less of that income that will actually go towards the import tax. We also know that since richer households save more, you can see the orange areas in these pie charts increase as income levels, they're paying less tax if they consume fewer imports, because it's only imports that will be taxed. Import spending makes up a much larger percentage of poor households' income and median income households' income. Therefore, the amount of import tax paid takes up a larger percentage of their income. And that can really be seen here. 3.4% of a poor American's income will go towards paying an import tax, whereas if you're in the top 1%, only 1.2% of your income will be spent on import taxes. This is the definition of a regressive tax. It is a tax that decreases as a percentage of income as incomes rise. So what is the consequence of this for the United States? Well, what it really means is that after-tax income inequality will increase. If the poor and middle class have a larger chunk of their income taken out to pay this import tax than the rich do, then after all taxes are paid, the poor and middle class will be left with lower disposable incomes than the rich. So what was the original goal of Trump's proposed 20% tax?
America will start winning again, winning like never before. We will bring back our jobs. We will bring back our borders. We will bring back our wealth. And we will bring back our dreams.
Of course, the stated goal is to pay for a border wall, but one of the implied goals is to increase the incomes of America's middle and working classes by increasing demand for labor in American factories. Of course, Trump ran his campaign on promising to bring jobs back to America, implying, of course, that more jobs in America will mean more income and an improvement in the standard of living and the actual income levels of people in America's middle class. However, if the Trump administration insists on imposing a tax on imports, people must understand that this very policy will have a negative effect on the disposable incomes of America's middle and working classes. Those very factory workers who might find job opportunities increase in some industries in which the U.S. actually can compete with other foreign countries, they may see their wages rise slightly. However, prices are going to rise, canceling out any increase in nominal wages. And more importantly, the very tax that brought those jobs back to America is going to increase the level of income inequality in society, leaving middle class and poor Americans with lower disposable incomes than they had before the import tax was imposed. So this leads to a very important question. What can America and what can the Trump administration do to actually bring jobs back? The solution is not to tax foreign goods and to withdraw from free trade agreements. Bringing jobs back does not have to mean returning to an era in which America did not trade with the rest of the world. We benefit greatly from importing goods that we cannot produce domestically or which would be inhibitively costly to produce domestically. The gains from trade may not be shared equally across all members of society, but the solution to improving the lot of middle class and poor Americans is to distribute those gains more evenly using domestic policy. Import taxes and withdrawing from free trade agreements is only going to make America as a whole poorer, create inflation, reduce the real incomes of the very people it's intended to help, and increase the level of inequality in American society.
Here we go.